Miss Schlevo, and welcome to my online video lectures. Today we'll be talking about England and the Parliament. First, we'll start talking about the Tudor dynasty, which Henry VIII and Elizabeth I were both a part of. Henry VIII had very good relations with Parliament, and this is very clear to us because Parliament ended up approving the Act of Supremacy, which made him head of the Church of England. Henry VIII also waged many wars overseas that he did not have the money for, but he still somehow got Parliament to levy or raise taxes for him for these wars. So if he didn't have this good relationship with them, things probably would have not gone in his favor. His daughter, Elizabeth I, also consulted and controlled Parliament during her rule of England. After Elizabeth I passed away, she didn't have any heirs, so her other family had to take over, and so the Stuarts, her cousins, took over. And her first cousin to take over was James I. And unlike his predecessors, he did not work well with Parliament. He constantly lectured Parliament about divine right, and the House of Commons did not like this. They completely resisted his claims to absolute power. Besides clashing with Parliament over money and foreign policy, he also clashed with the Dissenters, and the Dissenters are basically just Protestants who differed with the Church of England. And during this time period, the Dissenters were known as the Puritans, and if you remember from our discussions about the Reformation, the Puritans are Calvinists. And after James I, there was Charles I, who behaved totally like an absolute monarch. He imprisoned all of his enemies without a trial. He ended up raising taxes, and Parliament and the people did not like this. So in 1628, he signed a petition of right which prohibited him from raising taxes or from jailing his foes without Parliament's permission. But a year later, in 1629, he completely dissolved Parliament, and he ignored the petition and ruled without Parliament for over 11 years. So for over a decade, he completely ignored this petition and ruled without Parliament. And during these 11 years, he ended up creating a lot of enemies, especially with the Puritans. And he made these enemies with the Puritans because of the Archbishop of Canterbury, known as William Laud, who tried to force all clergy to follow strict Anglican rules. Well, if you remember what I said a couple minutes ago, the Puritans were Calvinists, so they were not going to follow all of these strict Anglican laws. And then finally, in Scotland, the Calvinists there were fed up and they revolted. And Charles I had to get some help from Parliament to suppress this revolt, so he ended up summoning Parliament. And once this happened, Long Parliament began. So from 1640 to 1653, Parliament met, and they actually started their own revolts. Instead of helping Charles I, they started their own revolt. Parliament tried and executed Charles I's chief ministers, including Archbishop Laud. Parliament also called for an abolition of bishops, so no more bishops. And they declared that Parliament could not be dissolved without its own consent. So Parliament could not be dissolved without Parliament's permission. And then in 1642, Charles I lashed back at Parliament, and he actually led troops into the House of Commons. And after he did this, a civil war erupted within England, and a civil war erupted between the Cavaliers and the Roundheads. The Cavaliers were wealthy nobles who supported Charles I, and they were called Cavaliers because they had extremely long, fashionable hair. And their opposition was known as the Roundheads. And the Roundheads were a group of country gentry, so country folk, town-dwelling manufacturers, so people that lived in towns, and Puritan clergy. And all three of these groups opposed Charles I. And they were known as the Roundheads because their hair was cut close to their heads, and their hair was typically short. And their leader was a guy named Oliver Cromwell, and he proved to be a very skilled general for a Roundhead, because most people expected the Cavaliers to win this war, but actually the Roundheads ended up winning due to the awesome leadership of Oliver Cromwell. And after the Roundheads ended up winning, Parliament set up a court and actually put Charles I on trial. In 1649, Charles I was executed, so dead, gone, killed. And then after that, the House of Commons abolished the monarchy, so no more kings. They abolished the House of Lords, and they also abolished the established Church of England. Um, and England was declared a republic, so no more kings. It was officially a republic, and this republic was led by Oliver Cromwell, and the republic was known as the Commonwealth. And with new power, obviously, most times comes challenge. So when the Commonwealth was established and Oliver Cromwell took over, Charles II, who was Charles I's uncrowned heir, he challenged the Commonwealth and he said, hey, I deserve to be king. And this led to revolts in Scotland and Ireland, which Cromwell smashed. He completely suppressed these revolts, and he was especially harsh on the Irish Catholics. In 1652, he exiled Catholics to barren land in the west of Ireland. And anybody who disobeyed this, so if the Irish disobeyed this, they would be killed on sight. Um, there was also an opposition group called the Levellers, who believed the poor should have as much say in the government as the gentry. And they were also suppressed by Cromwell. He did not let them have more of a say like they wanted. And then, so Oliver Cromwell was actually a Puritan, so the Puritans had a lot of influence during his rule. They established the Lord's Day, which happened on Sundays, and this is basically just a day set aside for religious observances. If you did not participate, you were fined. And so the Puritans also believed in providing education for all, and this was basically just so that people could read the Bible, which was very important to them. And then the Commonwealth actually ended up ending when Cromwell died in 1658. And shortly after he passed away, the Puritans ended up losing grip on England since their fierce leader Cromwell was gone. And in 1600, a new parliament was elected, and they invited Charles II back to take control of the government. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll discuss more of this in class tomorrow.
So I made a little error last time. It's supposed to be in the year 1660 that new parliament was elected, not in 1600, but in 1660 new parliament is elected, and that is when Charles II was invited back, and that is when he takes control of the monarchy again.